applicable to these times. There has to be a stronger term now. With everything by the morning you wake up, the headlines tend to remain the same, but you kind of feel that it's going to be yet another day. From the business perspective, I think we are living in very dynamic times. They're both good and bad things to dynamism. Technology is changing at an unprecedented rate. I come from the healthcare sector. I've been in the telecom sector. And when I see this sometimes appalling, but sometimes amazing convergence, it leaves me baffled as a public policy person. I mean, which side to really go with? And of course, we have huge supply chain disruptions happening yet. We still trying to push Make in India in a big way. We are still, there's some really important silver linings in the cloud for India. The global headwinds are strong, supply chain disruptions are there. We have two wars raging. And amidst all this, I think we couldn't be luckier but to have this wonderful panel with us, with Anil Padmanabhan. He doesn't need an introduction. He has been a great friend and a supporter of PAFI, senior journalist Anil. Anil, I'll just quickly introduce Ambassador Arun Kumar Singh. He was a former ambassador to US, France, and Israel. Ajay Bisaria. We have interacted with Ajay during his tenure as Indian High Commissioner to Canada, and he was also a High Commissioner to Pakistan and has just come out with a bestseller. Deepshika, thanks again for joining here with us on this wonderful session. Anil, over to you. And we have limited time, so we're going to start and, hope you keep your questions ready.
Thank you, Vinita, and thank you, PAFI, for having me. And I say this at every PAFI event, but I think it should be repeated every time because it's a remarkable achievement what you people have managed. I was very impressed that you have converted a segment into an industry now, public affairs, and all salute to you. I remember Ajay calling me in 2008 to a closed door meeting with all the familiar faces here. And this was at IIC, I remember, upstairs in a small little room. And look where you guys have reached today. Remarkable. And of course, I may be biased. Ajay is a personal friend, but he's the driving force behind me. And I leave it because he calls, I can never say no. So I think that works for, in general. I rest my case. So I often joke with him. I said, he's PAFI's Modi, So, anyway, thank you, Ambassador Singh and Ambassador Bisaria. Both of you have come in at a short notice. Deeply appreciated and very sporting of both of you. You're extremely busy and you've taken time off to talk to us. Grateful. So the format is that each of them will go 10 minutes and then I'll begin some conversation with them and then open out to all of you. So if I can request Ambassador Singh, if you could begin.
Thanks, Anil. So in our discussion, you asked me to just give some broad trend about where we see the world headed in the next 5 years or so. And of course, I think everybody will say that we are in an era certainly of flux and instability. You see the world leaders, including the US president and others, say that we are at an inflection point and that things are changing dramatically. Of course, when I talk to people in business, they say that you are comfortable making money when there is stability, makes you plan. But at the same time, when there is instability, you can perhaps make more money if you make the right calls. So taking business decisions amidst uncertainty can work even more. So I think you should really be prepared for uncertainty for the next 5 years, if not more. And the reason for that, as many have been saying, some have said that the world is between orders, or some have said that we are in a phase of disorder. And the main change that is happening, that the world that we knew with unipolar US domination is changing. And so from that time when there was a push for globalization of trade, globalization of production, the WTO was brought in. Russia and China were not challenging whatever the US wanted to do. For example, when they wanted to move into Afghanistan in 2001, they were supportive of the US. Even Iran at that time offered that if US airmen fell in Iranian territory, US could come and do search and rescue. Now, from that time to even in Iraq, in 2003, Russia and China didn't fully oppose what the US was doing or tried to block. To now, many people are saying that China has the intent and the capability to change the rules of the game in the years to come. But the reality is that China has already changed the rules of the game. Because whatever they have done, WTO has become dysfunctional. Because the US and Europe no longer want to live by the rules that the WTO had set. And the US, for example, they are saying that they're going through a phase of now having an industrial policy through the Infrastructure Act, Chips and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act. They are trying to incentivize industry to come and invest in the United States and giving huge amounts of money, including in semiconductors, something they were not doing earlier. So China has already changed the rules of the game and is forcing US and Europe to do things differently. If you saw the recent speech, for example, that President Macron made at Sorbonne, which is being described as Sorbonne 2, because he had earlier spoken in a similar manner in 2017. And he's trying to say that Europe now needs to have a major industrial policy because Europe has two rivals. On the one hand, you have China, which is leading a state-controlled system. Second, you have the United States, where it is the business and organized entity that influence decision-making and influence policy decisions. And we have Europe, which is different, where it is the citizen that takes the lead in setting policies, which business and others must follow. So Europe must come out with a separate identity. Of course, how many will follow what the French president is trying to say remains in question, because earlier Europe operated on the basis of the Franco-German tandem. When they worked together, Europe arrived at a policy and others followed. Right now, there is no Franco-German tandem. Germany is trying to figure out what it wants to do. The German economy has taken a major hit because of the disruption of energy supplies from Russia. Germany on China has a policy very different from the European Commission, very different from France. So Europe is struggling with its own policy related to China. Now, in this context, what we have found right now is that there is a major challenge across theaters to US influence. In the European theater, Russia is challenging the European security architecture that the US had set post 1990, post the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And where this conflict is headed, we don't know. At the moment, the momentum seems to be in favor of Russia. But at the same time, as the British Foreign Secretary said in a public event, that 20% of the Russian Black Sea Fleet has been destroyed by Ukraine. And Ukraine has now created a corridor for exports through the Black Sea Fleet. 50% of Russian holding of defense equipment has been destroyed. Several 100,000 Russians have died in this conflict. And at the same time, Russia has reorganized its economy so that the military-industrial complex in Russia is now doing very well. And that's where all the investment and everything is going. But the civilian sector is taking a hit. But then what does it mean for the longer term? Because the Soviet Union had ultimately collapsed because the civilian economy couldn't sustain what the military economy is doing. But in the short term, Russia remains strong and the momentum is in Russia's favor. Recently, the US National Security Advisor said that momentum will go back to Ukraine in 2025. Now, whether it will or it will just a projection remains to be seen. But the Western countries have shown that there has been a limit to their capacity to supply defense equipment in terms of the conflict they were facing and political support for sustaining this war effort. So this remains one area of uncertainty. The second area of uncertainty is in West Asia, because where this conflict will lead, again, we do not know. At one level, Israel was completely surprised by the kind of attack that Hamas did on October 7. It was a complete failure of the vaunted Israeli intelligence and defense establishment. They have reacted in a major way because, when I was serving in Israel, one of the things we kept hearing was never again. Never again will we allow to happen to us what happened during the Holocaust and the Second World War. And that Israel needs to restore deterrence. So their whole aim is to restore deterrence so that whoever did whatever they did in October 7 think twice before doing that again. So that's the strategy. And then don't listen to anybody while you're. But they've set for themselves the target of eliminating Hamas. Now, that is not going to happen. You know, they said that the United States took 20 years in Afghanistan to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. In the West Asia, Israel went into Lebanon in 1982 to drive the PLO out of Lebanon, which they did. But eventually they left from Lebanon after 18 years in 2000, creating the Hezbollah, which has become a very major organization and is challenging Israel's northern border. And there are about 60, 70,000 people from northern Israel who have had to relocate from there. So it is open to question whether Israel can really eliminate Hamas. So Israel is now facing a major challenge through non-state actors, the Hamas, the Hezbollah, the Houthis. And for the first time after 1973, a state actor in West Asia has directly attacked Israel with whatever success when Iran launched attacks against Israel. Because after 1973, no state actor had done that. So that has disrupted this process where the US had led the effort along with Israel to try and bring about cooperation between Israel and the Arab countries to isolate Iran. That process has been brought to an end. The Arab countries are now saying that willing to resume that process if Israel shows steps towards a two-state solution. And the Israeli government now, as is politics in Israel has moved to the right, does not want a two-state solution. And Netanyahu has been working since the mid-1990s to try and make sure that a two-state solution doesn't happen. Now, if a two-state solution doesn't happen, then you're obviously not going to get any stability in Israel, areas controlled by Israel, or in West Asia. So again, we have to factor in that instability. And Iran will, of course, try to strengthen itself in this framework. And finally, we have in the Indo-Pacific theater, where there is continuing uncertainty about how US and China will deal with their competition. US has said that they will try and maintain communication with China, but the competition is here to stay. And you're seeing all the restrictions on terms of technology access for Chinese companies in semiconductors and other areas, and those are likely to continue. If you see all the think tanks in the US, they're all the time now doing war games around what will happen if something happens in the Taiwan Straits. And so they're factoring that in, although, of course, as the US leaders have articulated, including the head of the Indo-Pacific Command, that their main strategy through whatever they are doing, the Quad, the new Squad involving the Philippines, the AUKUS, is to deter China, to try and signal to China that there will be huge costs with anything of that kind that you might do. And if they're able to deter China by creating uncertainty in the Chinese mind, then they have achieved their objective. Which, of course, means in terms of day-to-day economic engagement, technology engagement between US and China, there will be intense competition. So that's the world where we are, and I think that's where we'll be at least for the next 5 or 10 years.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the fascinating and insightful sweep of what is a very grim outlook out there. Ambassador, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I first of all, thank you very much for having me. And I am another member of the Can't Say No to Ajay Khanna Club. So that's how I am. But I also am here as a beneficiary of this world in flux that Ambassador Singh talked about, and also of the space PAFI has created. So after 35 years in the government, I moved to the private sector, and suddenly I feel business is booming because of geopolitical flux and the space that we have for conversations in public affairs that we are having. So let me just take forward what Ambassador Singh said, of the kind of world we live in. I would agree with him completely that we are in a world between orders, that the US-led post-World War II order is giving way to something which we don't know is what. So we are in that state of flux. And in today's world, what we are seeing is pushback from three major powers, or at least two major powers and one middle power, to the US hegemony. And we've seen that expressed in different ways. So one, in the Indo-Pacific theater, we see that as the US-China contestation. In the European theater, we see it expressed as the Russia-Ukraine conflict, as Russia's pushback to the push of NATO into what it felt was its sphere of influence. And in the West Asian theater, what we're seeing really is, again, a pushback perhaps by Iran directly, as we saw in Israel, but also indirectly with its proxies like the Hamas, the Houthis, and the Hezbollah. So we live in a world of enormous geopolitical flux that Ambassador Singh talked about, and its various ramifications for business in different ways. But we also live in an era of disruptions, and perhaps related to this, but also related to two other factors, apart from the behavior of the major powers, which is technology and climate change. So, in fact, there was a recent Economist kind of summary of the risks to businesses over the next decade, and it talked about all these cold conflicts possibly turning into hotter conflicts. In the Indo-Pacific space, the possibility, I think, of Chinese action on Taiwan is probably 10 to 15% in the next decade. And the kind of disruption that can cause, if you extrapolate from the kind of sanctions Russia faced after its invasion of Ukraine, is something that can be hugely disruptive for the world. On Europe, we've seen what the analyst Raja Mohan recently called Europe's trilemma. So Europe is not clear. Europe has to deal with three major powers which it is contending with, which is China, Russia, and the United States. And what we saw in the recent interaction between President Xi and Macron was the different ways in which Europe handles this trilemma. Ambassador Singh talked about Europe itself not speaking in one voice about this. And one very interesting aspect of this is that, which I think Raja Mohan pointed out, is that Europe is beginning to see China as an opportunity and Russia as a threat. Whereas in India, from our point of view, clearly the unruly, belligerent rise of China is the threat to the world. The US sees it in the same way. The US-China contestation is a real thing. And we see, at least to some extent, Russia as part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So I think this is the kind of world we live in, where the perceptions will also differ from where you stand. You would look at it differently. Also, I think when we look at the disruptions in the world, there is, the Economist pointed out, a distinct danger of the Chinese sort of takeover of Taiwan and with all its implications. There is also another danger they pointed out, and which was a green technology subsidy race between the US and China. So this contestation between US and China, in fact, Henry Kissinger, before he died, talked about AI driving this contestation to its heights. But there is a possibility, the Economist argues, of a green subsidy, which means the US starts giving, or the West starts giving their companies huge subsidies for green technologies, and the Chinese react because China wants to get some kind of monopoly over that space, and therefore there is a trade war which accelerates on this front in dealing with this kind of climate change and green issues. There is also the danger of extreme weather events. which could themselves cause huge disruption in supply chains. So climate-related, technology-related disruptions can be huge. The biggest disruption, I think, which the economist talks about, and which I agree, is the possibility of Donald Trump entering the White House. You could have a very disruptive United States and a very disruptive White House for the next 4 years. And all these conflicts can go in completely unpredictable directions thanks to this entry of Donald Trump there. Now, how he deals with both these conflicts, how he tries to resolve them, and how he deals with the larger issues, how he deals with various alliances that he disrupted in his last tenure, and does he change the trade pacts and what kind of trade wars and what kind of rearrangement of global supply chains we have. So I think it is a disruptive world, and all of us who lived through this decade know of this disruptive world, because we started this decade 2020 with the pandemic. We went to 2021 with a huge downturn in the economy thanks to the pandemic. In 22, the Russia-Ukraine war started. 23, we had the West Asia conflict. 24, we don't know what it will be. Is Trump going to be the only disruption, or will there be a climate event? Could there be the Chinese move in Taiwan, which comes earlier than we thought? So it is a world of enormous disruption, thanks to geopolitics, thanks to technology, thanks to climate change, and we don't have the benefit of the kind of world we enjoyed after the Second World War in the last century for 45, 50 years. And therefore, I think business has to be nimble. Business has to factor in these shocks, which will continue, which will impact everything from prices to supply chains to markets themselves. So I think we can't promise you a world that gets any better.
Thank you. So, if my slant of my questions, I will link it to India so that we can gain some insights into how India plays its cards in the next few years. So, in fact, both of you have flagged the uncertainty, the abnormality of circumstances, basically saying that the new normal is abnormal. So, I think the subtext of both of you are hinting at, if I'm not mistaken, is that there is an opportunity even in this circumstance. So, what does it mean for India? So, if I can begin with you.
I think what we are seeing is India's rise, which contrasted with China's belligerent rise we are promising the world, is going to be a benign one, is going to be a one based upon serious and continued structural reform. Modi 3.0, which is the expectation, is all about the promise of taking India to be a developed economy based on sustained reforms. So I think the China plus one story will continue to be a reality. India as an alternative to China will continue to be a reality. The self-reliant India, which means trying to get a lot of supply chains into India, and the manufacturing economy based or manufacturing and services based growth is going to be a reality. So I think for India, it definitely is an opportunity. I would make this argument, which I did in the public domain earlier, that for India, it's also important to be now a power that actually plays a proactive role in calming the world down, this world of flux and conflict. I would advocate in Modi 3.0, Vishwamitra India steps out of the crease and gets into formal peacemaking roles, and even if they don't succeed, in both these theaters, in the US-China contestation, we are an interested party. We are definitely going to be aligned with the US. We are going to be part of Quad, and we'll deepen our engagement with all the structures where China is not included to challenge China. Given that China's behavior continues to be belligerent and will continue to be belligerent. But in the other theaters, I think the Indian Prime Minister is possibly the only leader who can talk on the same morning with Biden and Macron and Zelensky and Putin, and at the same time also have a conversation with Netanyahu and also with with the Iranians and the Gulf states. So I think we have in us the ability to play a stronger role in the geopolitics of peacemaking in these conflict zones. But our central goal should clearly be to benefit economically as the kind of largest and fastest growing economy in the region, and promising sustained reform which allows for even greater collaborations in technology and in terms of investments coming into India.
Okay. Quick follow-up, Ambassador, before I just come to you. This you have set out the role that the government is required to play out, but to exploit this opportunity, you need a very important stakeholder which is in this room, India Inc. So what do you see that they have to do? Because we have seen private investment is still in doldrums even now, especially in greenfield projects. So what do you see? What should they do?
I think that's a loaded question. And I think the answer is obvious. I mean, we need more domestic private investment. That's a given. I am advising, for instance, a Canadian pension fund. And one of their questions often is that, yes, FDI is great, FDI is in great health, but you seem to be running the economy on public investments in infrastructure. Where is the private investment coming? Where are those projects? So certainly, but I think there were other structural global constraints at work here. We had the pandemic, we had a certain slowdown, we had overcapacity. But in the next few years, or let's say till the end of the decade, do we see greater private sector activity? And that is the expectation even of the global partners and global investors, because they're not going to join hands with public sector units or the government. They are looking at the private sector excellence and looking to collaborate and partner with that and invest in those projects to move the needle.
Right. So, Master, your thoughts on the private question?
Yeah, so linking both parts of your question. So, as I see it, the current approach of the government seems to be, one, sustain the relationship with Russia in the flux that's happening. Because if nothing else, you don't want Russia to go over to China on India-China issues, even though otherwise they're deepening their partnership. Deepen the partnership with the US and West, and strengthen yourself to deal with the challenge from China. And so that's the broad thrust of approach. And there, among the things that we see happening in terms of what is the opportunity for India, that the technology partnership, for example, with the United States is deepening significantly. This initiative on critical and emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum, biotech, semiconductors, defense, space, that the US announced with India in January 2023. Till then, they had not done with any other country. And then after that, they did with some European countries, with some in AI, with some in quantum. And the next big similar announcement they did was with South Korea in December last year, where there was also a para that now there will be trilateral India, US, South Korea cooperation on critical and emerging technologies. And it is following this agreement on critical and emerging technologies that the US has authorized the transfer of technology for the GE 414 engine to India. They say it is with 80% technology transfer, and the American officials have said that they have not authorized this level of technology transfer to any of their other allies and partners. Now, of course, we have to see how it is realized. And again, following ISET, 6 US companies came forward with announcements in semiconductors in India of different levels. And of course, you have Micron coming in with $825 million investment, total $2.5 billion. And it is the US government that led the initiative to set up the India-US Defense Acceleration Ecosystem, IndusX, bringing together startups in India and the US in the area of defense technologies. Because the US officials have indicated that they've been told by the government that by 2028, you have to take any Chinese supply out of the supply chain of US defense acquisition. If that's happened, then it creates opportunity for Indian companies. Hence, you have IndusX. And they've had 2 meetings, they've done joint awards, joint announcements, so that process is going on. So clearly, because of the competition that is happening, there is new opportunity for Indian companies to access higher levels of technology from the US and build on that basis. And of course, you see the reports about more and more global capability centers that are coming up in India. So the opportunity is out there, and I think people have to really look at that opportunity and build on it.
Okay. See, I just want to stay on the theme because both of you have identified this growing proximity diplomatically between and economically between India and the United States. But at the same time, both of you have also flagged that it's the most hated power on earth right now, with credible challengers like China, Russia. I mean, credible I meant in terms of ability to take them on, or even Iran for that matter. So what does it mean for India in such a relationship where, growing proximity to the US may expose India to some kind of collateral damage or diplomatic hate, but whichever way you put it. So, Ambassador would like to go first.
So I don't know about most hated. If you ask people in India, US would not be the most hated. They are, and in fact, in public opinion polls, it seems that after Israel, it is in India that the US gets maximum support.
Sorry to interrupt. I was saying hated in the world. With the country, they seem to be the target for several countries now. Credibly,
well, if you look at the major powers, US has its challenges. Russia is not very popular either. Nor is China. So, ultimately you have to figure out what you want for India. And India has to take decisions based on its own interests and build the relationships with its own interests. And along with that, with any power that you build, there will be questions. But so long as people see that you are eventually taking decisions based on your own assessment and interest. Even the Russians have said that, we understand that India is taking decisions based on its interest. The US National Security Advisor said that with India we're playing the long game, or the Secretary of State, that we understand India's compulsions related to Russia. So long the perception is that you're making your own assessments, you're taking into account your interests, people will accept that.
Ambassador, your thoughts?
No, so I would agree with that. I think from our point of view right now, the central challenge, let's say security challenge is China. This from all accounts and all assessments, Chinese behavior may not get better because there may be the structural problem of the rising power challenging the global hegemon and therefore wanting to establish its hegemony in Asia. So for various reasons, the Chinese challenge is our central concern. And for that reason, that is an additional driver for a much stronger relationship with the US, which is going to get closer, notwithstanding the fact that US will be challenged, will be disruptive, will be challenged by other powers because, the global system has not come to an equilibrium where the power is being shared in a kind of coherent way between the major powers. So I think India will continue to get closer to the US. And depending on how much of a problem the Chinese relationship is, there could be stronger defense, security collaboration. And India would, in fact, prefer a concert of democracies which come together to challenge the Chinese behavior. So I would say that it's also going to give us multiple collateral benefits, including in the areas of technology.
Okay. So, we're nearing the 20-minute mark. So, just before I open up the questions from the audience, I just want Ambassador Bisaria, you are here, and this is probably an issue which everybody must be thinking about. As they say, you can't decide your family, you can't decide your neighbor. So you know where I'm going. So, so what do we do with a country like Pakistan? So, and follow up with it is that does India have the capacity today to neutralize their damage abilities in India?
You know, I think Pakistan is a fairly surreal country. And what we have is a Pakistan right now which is in the grip of a major polycrisis, at least since 2021. And particularly after the Americans left Afghanistan, that is a time when Pakistan has reduced in geostrategic salience for the West, and it has sort of the geostrategic rents dried up for Pakistan, the kind of shoring up of its economy, and exposed a major chink in the country, which was the economic unsustainability. It was a country living on debt and getting more, each subsequent IMF loan becoming a basis for paying off the previous loan. So what Pakistan is now facing is going into its 24th IMF program and facing a collapsing economy. It's facing a very fractured polity. The army has been challenged twice in the last 1 year. On the 9th of May last year, people were on the street challenging the army. It's seen as one of the most hated institutions, but nevertheless, it is fully in charge. On the 8th of February, Pakistan had an election. Clearly, from every account, that election had the people voting angrily against the army and in favor of Imran Khan and his party, the PTI. But Imran Khan is in jail, and a new set of people are put in power, which the army then favored. So it's a bizarre situation, but nevertheless, I feel that given the fact that we've had elections, or we will have elections in both countries at the same time, it's a reason to pause and reflect and look at opportunities. And also given the fact that we haven't had major terrorism for a while, significant drops in cross-border infiltration, also the situation changing in Jammu and Kashmir, a ceasefire holding for more than 4 years. The objective conditions, I think, give reason for us to engage. And that initiative would have to come from Pakistan because it stopped the engagement 5 years ago after India made moves on Article 370. So I think there is reason for some cautious optimism. And on India's part, I would caution against strategic negligence, of the kind that Israel, I think, was guilty of why it faced 7th October from the Hamas. You feel that the problem has gone away and you want to deal with other problems in the neighborhood, and you feel Hamas is a limited problem, but guess what? It wasn't. So I think for us to consolidate the gains of the last few years, it's important to engage with Pakistan with a view to, stemming that terrorism, which is a fundamental problem for a long time.
Ambassador, I believe you need to leave, so can I ask you one more question before you head out?
So either that, or I just supplement a little
please
bit
do.
of what Ajay said on Pakistan.
We have another Pakistan expert there.
So, of course, Ajay has written this brilliant book on Pakistan, but 10 years of my career, I handled relations with Pakistan, and that's where I got all my gray hair. So, with Pakistan, you have to be prepared for unpredictability. I know the first time I started dealing with Pakistan was in 1988, and suddenly the relationship was very rosy. It was the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, Benazir Bhutto on the other side, new generation, post-partition generation. They had the trauma was partition was behind them. December 88, he went to Pakistan for the SAARC summit. June 89, he went for a bilateral visit within 6 months, unprecedented, everything going well. And by January 1990, Benazir Bhutto was talking of a 1,000 years war because Kashmir blew up in December 1989. So suddenly it can change. Now then I went away, came back to deal with Pakistan, starting with the Agra summit, which again Ajay has described, which failed completely. And then we had 9/11. We had 13 December attack on our parliament. We had Operation Parakram, the mobilization of our forces. And then suddenly, in April 2003, the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, in a visit to Srinagar, said one sentence: I'm ready to extend the hand of friendship to Pakistan again. That one sentence completely changed the mood, and peace broke out between India and Pakistan. And between 2003 and 2008, we had the most productive phase in India-Pakistan relations. There was ceasefire, there was the back channel talks in Kashmir, which were the most productive. So, and of course, then 2008, for their own domestic reasons, Asif Zardari was trying to move positively with India, so the army generated the 26/11 attack in Mumbai. The process comes to a halt, which we have not recovered from. So with Pakistan, you should be prepared for the fact that it can move in either direction suddenly. So post-election, if something happens, don't be surprised.
But to the credit of this incumbent government, and as you say, Modi 3.0, the first, when he took charge, Modi actually invited Pakistan for the swearing in. So it was what do you see that as many questioned it, but do you think it was diplomatically courageous or diplomatically foolish?
I think it was courageous, and I think it was a risk for peace. And, I've argued in my book that from Nehru to Modi, Indian prime ministers have the instinct of saying, can I solve this Pakistan conundrum? This is a continuing problem, can I solve it? And, Vajpayee had that instinct on all, his Lahore bus yatra and his calling of Musharraf to Agra and so on. And I think Modi was learning from this experience. And so, as you said, 2014, he comes in, Nawaz Sharif is there for his swearing in. They go on to meet 5 times over the next 18 months and have, when Modi goes in December of 2015 on Nawaz Sharif's birthday to Lahore, we had planned by then that there would be a comprehensive dialogue, everything would normalize. But we had a deal breaker in terrorism. So, you can't fault this government for trying. People tend to forget this. They call it hawkish and so on. That for the first 18 months, they tried their best. It's just that later they came up with an answer on setting up a credible deterrent for terrorism, which previous governments had not set up. And none of us had been able to set that deterrence in the 80s, 90s, 2000s.
Before you leave, Ambassador, just one question from the audience. I think Ajay has been raring to ask. Okay, so anybody is leaving, so if anyone from the audience wants to ask him a question.
Ajay, this is for you.
The question, Arun is leaving. I'm here.
Leaving. He's here.
Yeah.
This is for you. This is actually you interrupted me. Both of you could
Okay.
equally well
I
answer.
directed to him and Boka.
I only started with Ajay because he mentioned it in the context of the pension funds from Canada. But the statement was FDI is okay, but it should come from private sector. Now the RBI has released, so this is not just hearsay. RBI has released a document which says that from 2016, FDI has dropped from 1.7% of GDP to April to October 23 to 0.6. So it's not just the local direct investment into industry. The actual foreign direct investment too has fallen. Would you like to comment on that?
So I was referring to the 3 consecutive good years we had of $80 billion odd of FDI, even in pandemic years. Now there has been a slowdown, certainly in the last year. Now, I think the jury is out. I've heard different views on why. But perhaps if we turn it around on its head, one of the questions that global investors are asking is that our local partners are not so gung-ho about the economy. They aren't investing. So where are those projects which folks are interested in and excited about?
One question. Okay. From the disruptor, what are the main challenges that you see vis-a-vis India when he comes here?
So look, we had Trump 1.0 and the India-US relations did reasonably well during that time. I think Trump 2.0 would be even more unpredictable than Trump 1.0 if he comes in, because he'll come in with certain amount of anger and vengeance against the system. All that is there. The only area where I see cause for us is in the area of tariffs. Because Lighthizer has even recently said and written very often that the India's trading environment is very challenging, the tariffs are very high, and they need to do that. And so that's the only area where Trump was really tough on us, and even unreasonably so. Because, for example, he removed GSP. There was no need to do that, and Biden has not been able to bring it back after that. He publicly derided the Indian Prime Minister on a number of occasions for the tariffs on Harley-Davidson, which we imported 80 units per year. So it was a certain approach that he had. But other than that, it was Trump, for example, that placed India on strategic trade authorization level 1 for highest level technology releases. It was Trump that went to Houston to join the Indian Prime Minister at that rally, meant for a visiting foreign leader, which US President normally don't do. And not only did he go there, he spoke there, stayed right through the event. Because I think the vote and funding capacity of the Indian American community is something that he would want to reach out. And finally, if Trump is going to take a softer line on Russia, as he tried to do in 1.0, that's not bad for us. And if he's going to take a tougher line on China, that again is not bad for us. So I think the tariff issue and plus the US investments in India during that phase will have to play it carefully, that it is seen as adding to US capacity and not taking away from US capacity. So if we play that carefully, we should be okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, Rahul, if just adding a bit of my two-penny information to the US election, I just picked this up in a conversation, it was a closed door, so can't identify the person. Someone who ran Hillary Clinton's campaign, and he was saying that he was very confident that Trump will not win. And the reason he gave is the X factor. The women are up against because of abortion. So they are very aggressively coming out and voting, cutting across the edge. I don't know whether he's right or wrong, but I thought could contribute. So, of course, please. Mike.
You spoke about Pakistan. What is happening in Canada?
I think in Canada, it's important to separate the noise from the reality of what happens. The trouble is a lot of stuff gets into the front pages, which has been going on as managed noise. I was there 2.5 years and, it was sort of managed. We wouldn't dignify anything those guys said with commentary. But I think what happens is even in our election cycle, when an aggressive statement comes, it gets batted and then it kind of gets into a loop and it becomes important. Because this issue of the Khalistanis has been with us for a while. In 1983, Mrs. Indira Gandhi wrote a letter to Pierre Trudeau saying there's a guy called Power, be careful, he's dangerous, he's Khalistani. And, as far back as that. And then our grouse was they did nothing about it. And 2 years later, he was the bomber of Kanishka Air India. So, it has been a problem all through. What happens in Canada is that of the 2 million odd people of Indian origin, 800,000 odd Sikhs, less than 1% are Khalistani activists. But they've just organized themselves around 15 gurdwaras. They managed to get a hold of a political party, NDP, run by Jagmeet Singh, which happens to be the junior partner of the current coalition, the Liberal coalition. And therefore, the politicians find it useful to amplify what they're saying. We have the same problem also in the United States. We have the same problem also in Australia and the UK of these guys. Limited numbers, the Sikhs for Justice, but they make a lot of noise. And the difference in the handling of it between the US and Canada is that in the US, we say we have a great relationship, but we have a major security problem, which our security experts ought to address. That's not what happens in Canada. What happens is that it gets elevated to the level of Prime Minister, completely eliminating any diplomatic space we might have to, kind of contain it. So I think it's a lot of noise rather than the reality of a major problem. Despite all that, business goes on. $100 billion of Canadian investment is coming in. The pension funds seeing huge growth, investment firms seeing exits at 30%. So I think overall the relationship is in a fairly good place, except for this major irritant in the relationship.
In fact, in UK, there's more such irritants on the way if Labour comes to power, because their entire MP base is based of Bangladesh and Pakistan MPs. So, Vinita, you had a question? Okay. Okay. Rahul? Yeah, behind you.
So actually, this is also a question for Mr. Arun Kumar Singh. But just, Ambassador Bisaria, if you could, sort of throw some light on ASEAN and Africa in the US and China conflict, and India between the three. Because I think there were two ways about whether India walking out of the whole ASEAN trade deal, whether it was good, bad. But I think these two regions and trading blocks, and what does it mean for them?
So I think, your question is how do they deal with the US-China?
US-China conflict, and what does it mean for India? Does it, again, we didn't do the ASEAN.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I think when things evolve, we take some decisions which are taken, in that heat of the moment. In my view, the RCEP decision is still is not a completely shut door, and it could be re-examined, but it plays into the whole business of trade deals. So what India has now done, given the WTO is paralyzed, is move into a new paradigm of trade agreements and limited trade agreements. So I think India's instinct is to be a little concerned about larger trade agreements and go in for bilateral trade agreements, which are limited ones, the kind we achieved with the UAE and Australia, and the kind which are in discussion with the UK and was in advanced discussion with Canada until the politics derailed it. But, it's there sort of in deep freeze. We can unfreeze it anytime and have that conversation. But, the larger point you raise about the US-China contestation, I think different blocks deal with it differently. I think the ASEAN, for instance, doesn't have a very strong view. They navigate it. Whereas in India's case, we are certainly an interested party. So we are in the US camp, or the US is in our camp in this contestation. And we would like a larger, sort of partnership with countries challenging China's hegemony. And our worry in organizations where China is a member is that it may flex its muscles unreasonably, and should we, there will be a sniff test always for any organization with China present on what it means for us.
Thank you. Himar? Thank you so much. Just wait for the mic. The other be right.
Thanks. Ambassador Bisaria, we're well aware of, the initiatives the government has taken in terms of hedging or mitigating the risks posed by China. I've studied in China. My master's is from there, so I understand the country. if we were to actually find a genuine solution, I mean, if there was a critical dispute at Ladakh or Arunachal Pradesh, to what extent the foreign powers would come? We have the Rafale, but look what Macron was doing with Xi.
Just hold the
right?
mic closer.
So if we were to find a solution with the Chinese, which would be acceptable to both sides, which is India and China both, is there a possibility? And if there is a possibility, what could that solution be? Because both the governments would have to buy in and the population also has to buy in for lasting peace. China is not Pakistan. There was always a certain amount of the disparity that we have in China. Even if you're a $34 trillion economy by 2047, 2050, they're going to be far ahead. So the disparity is so huge that if we have to find a lasting solution, what could that be acceptable to both sides, governments and the people? Thank you.
So I think the answer is simple. The best case scenario certainly is that China resumes the status quo that we had in 2020, and that gives up its policy of this salami slicing, because the India's contention is that without peace and tranquility on the border, notwithstanding the huge economic potential of this relationship, notwithstanding the 5x differential between the two countries, we still can do business with China, but it's not business as usual while we have the border problem. So clearly the answer is bilateral, because we've had 20 commanders meetings and diplomatic meetings and hints at the political level that we can have a conversation. So if the two countries find that modus vivendi to get along, they will. And that's completely a bilateral process. You won't have American soldiers fighting in Ladakh. You won't have the Russians there. That is clearly a battle which we must fight. But we must be prepared for this aggravating beyond a point. But at the same time, the attempt certainly is that we find this modus vivendi with China, whether through multiple alliances with other global partners or on our own, so that we can get on with the business of growing our economy and getting to be a developed country. I think that is our central challenge.
Right at the back.
Hi.
And then, of course.
Ambassador, if you can give us a sense of where the multilateral and plurilateral talks on climate change will go forward, and how will emerging economies like India engage in these multilateral and plurilateral forums? And secondly, do we also see green NTBs emerge going forward as the global order tries to deal with climate change?
You talked about time change?
No,
Climate change.
Oh, climate change. Sorry. I didn't quite hear it. Yes, of course. I think for India, that is certainly something which we recognize as an important factor. We've had a conversation in India about harnessing this opportunity of certainly green technology. But the challenge is the climate finance. I think the promise of those $100 billion is something that in global fora, multilateral, plurilateral, we will have to keep asking the West for making sure that both the climate finance and the climate technologies are flowing into India. But we also want to do that in multiple alliances bilaterally. So, we've had these green partnerships with North Europe, and I suspect we'll have many more such green partnerships where the focus will be on green technologies.
Hi, this is Harish. My question is, historically, the connection between internal politics in India and foreign policy was limited. But we now see a lot of shadows of internal politics coming to foreign policy. Since we are in election season now, and there's the narrative seems to be this 400 powers might not be the case, and it might be a tighter election. Do you see a foreign policy change if this government comes back with a reduced majority, or God forbid that we have a 272 less kind of numbers for BJP?
I don't see significant changes in India's foreign policy. There may be a kind of difference in emphasis, but across governments, and this has been the reality, at least since the turn of the century, the foreign policy that, for instance, Vajpayee put in place was we saw it continuing in UPA times, and we see many of its elements continuing. For instance, the relation, and much of it is guided by global factors as well. So I don't see a very ideological political imprint on our foreign policy. I think it's governed by the national interest of the time of the day, and it's also deeply connected with our own ambitions to be not just an aspiring power, but a developed economy. So I think it is connected to those objective factors of the way we want to grow our country, our economy, rather than strongly ideological political moves.
Swati? Just there, right there.
Sorry, I stepped out for 5 minutes, so I'm not sure if this was covered. I wanted to know more about, so the US-India relationships is always on a, jagged graph, right? It goes up, there is some little bit of a, so now I'm looking at it like from an India Inc. or basically from the corporate perspective. The ISET strategic alliance and so much more. What we're hearing is that, hey, in certain areas, which is deeply strategic, may it be semiconductors, satellite, and what have you, there is, of course, a lot of effort that is going on. But for the larger tech community, where I see that this could be perhaps a geopolitical advantage too, is there anything that you're seeing that we are not? We are like, kind of, not that happy with it.
Okay, I wish you'd asked that question of Arun Singh, our ambassador in the US, who was part of the negotiating teams on that. But I'll offer a more broader kind of assessment of that. And I feel that in the last Modi visit, the kind of limits we achieved in breaking the US hesitations, what were being called hesitations of history, in sharing technology, many of them were broken. So particularly semiconductor and also in critical emerging technologies. So I think this will only grow. And regardless of who is there in the White House, I think the partnership is now reaching such levels of trust that technology will be a very major vector on which we go ahead. So I see the US sharing a lot of technologies. We won't get into the Five Eyes or in critical intelligence sharing, because we refuse to be what we call an ally because we want to retain that strategic autonomy. But I think technology is going to be opening space.
Okay. We are almost out of time, but I'll just go off script a bit here and end with, we have another ambassador who's very patiently sitting in the audience, and someone who's an old friend, and people don't know that he's the one who negotiated the release of hostages in Afghanistan. So he has many, many stories to tell us. So either those or any comments on what you heard today, Ambassador Ganesham.
I find that to be a listener is the safest alternative one has. But now that you have pushed me into the playing field, I have to say something. The only thing that I have heard patiently from both the ambassadors, wonderful speakers, and they have brilliant careers behind them. One thing that I'm supposed to be writing on at the moment is a book called Africa, the Continent of the Future. And what amazed me when I was doing the research for this book is that Africa is a more ancient civilization than all the ancient civilizations that we have heard in our history books and read in our books. This is the result of my due diligence and studies that is happening now. The African civilizations go back to about 73,000 years, and Indus Valley goes to about 5,000, or Egypt goes to about 3,000. The second thing that amazed me was the kind of structural change that is taking place in the population of the world. Today, Asia and Africa are leading in population, but give another 25 years. Today, 1 out of 6 people in the world is an African. Another 25 years, 1 out of 4 will be an African. And another 50 years, 1 out of 2 will be African. That is going to be the future. That is going to be the market. That is going to be the consumption center. And that is going to be the real geographical space the world is going to look at for its own survival, whether it is environment, climate change, growing food for the world, protecting the world from hunger and from disease. Everything is going to come from there. So all that I wanted to say, while we are talking about major powers in the world making changes, I can also see some continents like Africa making a change for the next generation. They are slow. Right now, they are not visible. But for the generation that follows us, that will be a major force to reckon with. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And thank you, Ambassador Bisaria. Please join me in thanking all of them, both of them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Deepshika, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Anil. Ambassador Bisaria, thank you so much. And of course, Ambassador Singh has moved out. But my God, I think that last 1 hour has been a huge sector of conversation on, I don't think it's just India in flux, but the world in flux, as you've outlined. And there is a lot going on geopolitically. And I love the way you talked about some of the key disruptors, right? And that's what maybe if India focuses more on the disruption of technology, looking at climate change and what that will bring in, because I think the larger universe is going to continue to do what they're doing. There are about 65 countries who have either gone for election or going for election this year, 2024. That's like half the world's population. So there is a lot that's going to happen in this year, and it'll be interesting to see where we land. And when we are back here on this stage, maybe a year later, it'll be useful to see what's happened from all that we've talked about today. But obviously, there is a lot of opportunity for India. And if we stay focused on that opportunity, we should hope to come out stronger in front. And I think for all of us in the room, I look at this again as another opportunity, because when the world is in disruption, flux, inflection, and our businesses and our companies are looking to us to help advise and navigate. So again, another opportunity for us to step up and give more perspective and obviously get more guidance from people like you and so on, so that we can make a difference. So thank you so much once again for joining us, and look forward to seeing more of you. Thanks so much, Anil. You're always wonderful in your questions and taking it into different directions. Thank you, Vinita. And we're going to have a bit of a break now. So after these 2 sessions, we'll have about 20 minutes of networking. Come back to this room at 12:30 and save yourself. We'll do lunch after that. So you can grab some coffee and cookies, and we'll see you back at 12:30. Thank you.
He has trudged kilometers. I have trudged kilometers.